These days, it can be hard to imagine what a movie, based on an existing franchise or IP, that isn't packed with hollow fan service, preachy woke undertones, or legacy characters reimagined for our modern age would even look like. But Dungeons & Dragons is here to remind us that it's still possible to make a big budget film adaptation of a beloved franchise with an immensely dedicated fandom and avoid the pitfalls so many other movies that came before it fell prey to. The best way to describe Dungeons & Dragons is that it's innocent fun in a fantasy world with just enough charm and heart to give the story meaning and make you care. Think of Guardians of the Galaxy, but in a medieval setting. Holga the Barbarian even fills the role of Drax from Guardians of the Galaxy, offering unwanted, blunt statements to conversations at awkward moments. The movie manages to do a pretty good job of walking the line between catering to D&D fans and not alienating the casual viewer. Now, obviously, they had to step outside of the rules of D&D here and there in order to tell a story on the big screen, but it would take a special kind of asshole to be annoyed at how this movie balanced being faithful and palatable. You don't need to know a thing about D&D to enjoy this movie, but if you're a seasoned dungeon master or party member, we think there's plenty of references and reverence for the source material to put a smile on your face. The somewhat merry band of heroes we follow all have their own distinct personalities for the most part, and it's genuinely fun getting to see them interact and play off of each other. Simply put, this movie is a crowd pleaser. Of course, that means it doesn't take any huge risks with the plot or the characters, but you'll find few people complaining about it. Speaking of the plot, let's go over a recap of the storyline. But just before we do that, we have to give you an obligatory spoiler warning. But just before we do that, please take a second to leave a like on the video if you would. Okay, spoilers ahead. You've been warned. We meet Edgin the Bard and Holga the Barbarian, who are being held in a high-security prison. Edgin tells his backstory to a parole board, and we learn that he was a spy with a wife and daughter. After his life of spying catches up to him and his wife is killed, he meets Holga and they take on a job with Sophina the Wizard, Simon the Sorcerer, and Forge the Rogue to steal from a keep where a tablet of resurrection is being held, an item that can bring his wife back to life. Sophina betrays the rest of the party after she recovers a magic red horn, and Edgin and Holga end up imprisoned as Forge and Simon get away with the tablet, with Forge promising to look after Edgin's daughter, Kira. Back in the present day, Edgin and Holga end up escaping prison and eventually track Forge down to Neverwinter, where he's somehow become the Lord of Neverwinter. Edgin is reunited with his daughter Kira there, who is less than happy to see him. They find out that Forge has been lying to Kira, saying that her dad was after the Tablet of Riches when they got caught and left her all on her own, not the Tablet of Resurrection, and that Forge's plan all along was to get them all caught during that job. Forge orders one of his guards to return Edgin and Holga to prison, but Sophina, who's here now advising Forge, tells the guard to kill them instead, but they manage to escape. The two determine that they need to put together a party in order to break into the castle and free Kira, so they seek out Simon the Sorcerer, a mediocre conjurer who comes from a long line of powerful sorcerers but lacks even a shred of self-belief. He then leads them to Doric the Druid, whose people want to end Forge's rule. We learn that Sophina is secretly a member of a group of evil wizards called the Red Wizards, and that Forge is bringing back the High Sun Games, a type of gladiatorial combat that attracts all the wealthiest nobles and lords and ladies to Neverwinter to bet on the games. The party plans to steal from the vault that's secured with powerful enchantments during the games, with Edgin hoping to regain the Tablet of Resurrection to prove to his daughter that he wasn't lying. They find out they'll need the Helm of Disjunction in order to get past the enchantments on the vault, and their search leads them to Zank, a gallant paladin who takes them to the Underdark where the helm rests. In the meantime, it's revealed that Sophina is working on behalf of her master Zastam, another red wizard, and she's been using Forge to gain power. Thanks to Zank, the party recovers the helmet they seek, and they escape from assassins and chonk the magic dragon, but then Zank leaves the party. Simon's lack of confidence prevents him from using the helmet as Edgin thought he'd be able to, and the party learns that Edgin's been lying about their prospects, but he gives a rallying speech about failure and legacy to keep the party together. After all of their plans go tits up in Neverwinter, everyone gets captured, but they negotiate to die in the arena during the games instead of being executed, which Sophina convinces Forge to allow. The party deduces that Forge became the Lord of Neverwinter and resurrected these games in order to steal from the nobles himself, such as rogue life. After escaping monsters and a maze in the arena, they all make it to Forge's waiting ship where they confront him and Kira. Kira learns the truth and they rescue her from Forge and sail off into the sunset. That is until they turn to see the sky above the arena blackening as Sophina conjures a zombification spell over Neverwinter. Putting aside their desire for riches and other self-serving goals, the party turns back to face Sophina. They work together to defeat the Red Wizard, with the help of Kira, but Holga is mortally wounded and dies. Edgin finally lets go of ever bringing back his wife and uses the tablet of resurrection to bring Holga back. Everyone lives happily ever after, except Forge. He's tracked down by Zank, and we finish with him trying to get a pardon from the same parole board in the same high-security prison Edgin and Holga were in to start the movie. End film. Beside just the overall fun you have watching the movie, the other major thing that stuck out to us was how this movie really felt just like an adventure that people would have playing Dungeons & Dragons. The story moves along at a pretty good pace as the party faces one problem to solve after another. They often need to regroup, put their heads together to find a solution, and end up getting out of a jam thanks to someone's resourcefulness in a high-stress situation. You could easily imagine zooming out of this fantasy world entirely and seeing the D&D players controlling these characters, having these discussions, and trying to roll their way out of these scenarios. The characters all mostly fit their typical class archetypes from D&D, which is just another way the movie honors the source material. Forge, the rogue, was constantly scheming and scamming. Holga, the barbarian, was blunt and to the point. Edgin, the bard, was jovial and loquacious. And the roles that every character played, rogue, barbarian, paladin, bard, sorcerer, druid, they're all pulled directly from the game, along with quite a few other references like mimic chests or the Dragonborn. Even all of the locations and factions mentioned all exist and fit into the lore as far as we could tell. Now, it's all mostly surface level stuff, and there's probably a handful of people nerd raging and breathing fire online like a dragon in their own dungeon in their mom's basement about how this movie didn't dive deep enough into the lore and blah blah blah. But the movie is better served keeping things light and reaching a wider audience rather than twisting itself in knots trying to please the unpleasable basement dwellers. Everyone did their job in terms of acting here. No one's going to win any awards for their performances, but they did well enough in bringing the characters to life and playing off of each other. If you have to highlight a few performances as better than the rest, then Chris Pine and Hugh Grant get the nod there. The storylines came together pretty well at the end. Edgin finally learned to let go and stop trying to selfishly right the wrongs of the past and focus on being good in the present. Simon discovers during a critical do-or-die moment that he's the only thing holding himself back, and just a bit of self-belief is all it takes to reach his potential. And even though it's spelled out pretty plainly, the idea that choosing to give up is the ultimate form of failure is a good message, even if it's a tad cliche. The party must learn to keep going in the face of their failures, relying on their resourcefulness and drive to find a way to succeed in the end. And while this was a fun movie with quite a few moments of levity, the movie knew when to put the humor aside and let things get more serious. As for the action, there wasn't a ton of it, but we're also still coming down from the powerhouse action of John Wick from last week, so our perspective may be skewed. There was enough peppered throughout the film to keep things interesting, and it all pretty much looked good. Michelle Rodriguez has the physical presence to realistically pull off an actual ass-kicking girl boss, and her fighting scenes don't suffer from the same problems other movies suffer from, with 90-pound women overpowering people 3 times their size. And on that note, this movie really felt free of any kind of preachy narratives or woke agendas. Its goal was to entertain, pass on a solid message, and leave people with a smile on their face, and mission accomplished on that front. Now, the general populace really seems to be enjoying it, at least in terms of the ratings, with the people giving it a 93%. We're giving it an 85 ourselves, which of course earns it the Great Watch label. Now, everything we've said about this film has been pretty glowing up to this point, so let's go over where this film fell flat. First off, there was quite a bit of good humor, not great humor. The movie is not a comedy, so there's nothing wrong with that, but you're not going to be laughing your ass off thinking back on the gags the next day. There was an instance where they needed to cross a bridge that collapses in front of them, only to find that a random stick Holga's been carrying is actually the magical teleporty stick they just so happen to need to solve this problem. It's such a glaring plot device that maybe it's actually a reference to a D&D game mechanic that's gone entirely over our heads. And the second you realize that Holga is dying, you see the usage of the tablet to bring her back from a mile away. But probably the biggest question mark for this film is Dork the Druid. The actress did fine bringing the character to life, but the script really didn't give us much of an idea about who this character is even supposed to be. Other characters tend to speak for her when it comes to why she's driven to help the party overthrow Forge, and there doesn't seem to be enough dialogue for her to develop a personality. She's really just there to conveniently take the form of whatever animal the party needs, and for other characters with better written lines to play off her. She pretty much just feels lost in the whole film. Lastly, as we said before, this movie opted to play it safe and be a crowd pleaser, rather than take any real risks with the story or its characters. And with less risk comes less reward, which in our view prevents the film from working its way into the 90% range. Beyond all that, some of the creatures they brought to life looked a little funky or cheap from time to time, but it's a minor issue. And the film generally makes up for it with some pretty good practical effects. Dungeons & Dragons, while not a perfect movie, or even an incredible movie, managed to do a damn good job of entertaining without lecturing us about modern issues or pandering too hard to an existing fanbase, which these days feels like an incredible feat. We always like to give movies a rating right after viewing it and then sleep on it to see which direction the needle moves after letting things settle. Most of the time, the needle moves downward as we find more and more flaws with a film. But for Dungeons & Dragons, our rating of the movie the following morning actually ticked up slightly as we had more appreciation for how the movie managed to mostly bring a D&D session with friends to life on the big screen. Anyway, we think you'll like it too and recommend that you check it out for yourself. Now, we only really have a cursory familiarity with D&D and how it's played, so for those of you more familiar with the hobby and the franchise, what were your thoughts on the movie? Is there anything we missed that stuck out like a sore thumb to you? If you weren't very familiar with D&D going into the movie, did you feel left out of anything from the film? Let us know in the comments below. If you haven't already, please click the thumbs up as it helps our channel reach more fans out there, and click the subscribe button as well to stay tuned to the channel for other reviews of current shows and movies. Thank you for joining our party today, and we'll catch you on the next one.